Thanks for joining us today. At City Life, we have one purpose, making it easy for people to say yes to Jesus. We believe that today's message will empower you to do exactly that. But remember that church is so much more than a sermon you listen to. It's a living, breathing community that we invite you to be part of. We hope to see you this Sunday morning here at City Life.
I'm going to give some things. I was given the subject of scary mama for Mother's Day, which I think is kind of funny. But there's a part of me that really resonates with this because, you know, a lot of people tell how when they follow God or when they follow the voice of God, there's just this voice of peace and comfort, and they just knew because they were just led by peace. Most of the time, my experience in following God is most of the time when I've really heard him, it's been actually kind of terrifying. It's actually been challenging, some scary steps in my life in those times. And you know, God's voice is a voice of comfort, but it's also a voice of challenge. God doesn't just speak to where we're at, but he's always leading us to something. So it's not all just about being comforted here and now. God does speak comfort to us in our pain, but he also wants to lead us to a place of wholeness. He also wants to lead us to a place of strength, which means we need to be challenged. And sometimes, you know, we want comfort, but to actually be restored and strong, we need to be challenged. And perfect example of this, how many of you ever struggled with like back pain or back issues at some point in your life? They suck. Like back pain sucks. A few years ago, I went through a bout with like sciatica and could hardly walk for a year. And that's terrible. Like it is a super painful. It's you know, when you're having back pain, what do? You go to the chiropractor. You go to the massage therapy, and you try to comfort this thing back to health. But once you've kind of restored the back to a place of semi-functioning life, a lot of us stop there. Okay, it's not hurting anymore, so I don't need to go to the chiropractor, and I don't need to get any more massages. But your back actually isn't restored yet, because you haven't built up any strength in it. And a lot of us, you know, we want the massages, but what we really need at that point, we actually need deadlifts. And we need core strengthening. And we need to do things like sit-ups. Everybody just like, who told him he could talk this way? But you do. You need to, you actually, as a part of the restoration, there actually needs to be strength built back up into those muscles. And it's actually a really long process. And the best prevention to injury down the road isn't getting a massage every week, but it's actually building up that strength back. Now the massage plays a role, but the deadlifts play a role too. And you don't want to get rid of the massages because they're nice, but if you neglect, what I'm saying is this, is if all we can hear of the voice of God is the comforting massage, I need God to massage me, massage my feelings, massage my pain, massage my hurts. If all we can hear is God the massager, but we can't hear God the personal trainer, we're missing half of his instructions. So it's like if I give you directions on how to get to Calgary and you can only hear half of my directions, you're not going to end up in Calgary. You're going to end up in like Ballsack. I had to. That is Joy Dawn. Joy Dawn said that, and I was like, I am so using that in the next service. Ball sack. It's a real place. Whatever. What are we talking about now? The first 10 minutes is all about that. Ending up in ball sack. What's funny is it's a real place. No, the 12-year-old in me is having a great time right now. So anyways, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion around what it means to hear God's voice. What is God's voice? And I just want to kind of start this by saying feelings are not God's voice. And a lot of times, some of the things I've felt the strongest about were actually just me feeling strong about something. And feelings are just a biological, chemical reaction of your body. They're trained neurological pathways in your head. You have certain feelings when you see certain events or when you see certain things because you've actually trained your brain to respond that way, or you've trained your body to respond that way. And so feelings can lead you astray just as easily as they can lead you to the right place. And one of the most dangerous things is to ascribe divinity to your feelings. And you're going to make all sorts of mistakes in your life if you think the depth of feeling represents God's will. And there's certain things that I can tell you how you feel just based on you answering a few questions. If you were to tell me that you have a high sugar and a high refined food or high refined flour diet, I'm going to tell you, you occasionally struggle with depression. And it's like, you can say, wow, you're a prophet. No, this is just science. This is the result. When your body gets flooded with sugar, then your biological system has to counteract that sugar by releasing insulin into your bloodstream. When that insulin is released into your bloodstream, when it's done, you're crashing. It's just what happens. It's the way your body works. Wow, that's deep. If you exercise on a daily basis, I know that you overall live with a better sense of well-being than if you don't. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, because when you exercise, dopamine's released into your bloodstream. And when dopamine's in your bloodstream, it makes you happy. So next time you're feeling a little low, instead of reaching for the bag of potato chips, go for a run. Say, what will that do? Just try it. Seriously, just try it. You'll feel better. You'll feel a lot better. You're lacking motivation to do work, or you're feeling lethargic. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just do 20 push-ups and then go back to work. Or if you can't do 20 push-ups, do something. But do something, because that actually helps you. But none of that's God's voice. That's just science. It's just how you were designed. It's how your body works. How do we know how God speaks to us? How do we know what God is saying? Well, there's a great reference point that we all have. Most of us have them on our phones, the voice of God on our phone. Most of us have, written documentation of things he said sitting around our house somewhere. It's called a Bible. Yeah. It's a great go-to resource for knowing what God has said. And I would recommend, a great place to start is just to start with God on the earth, and that his name is Jesus. And just start finding out what he said. Start studying what he said. And then when you hit a part of it and you think, I really needed to hear that, that's a great way of indicating what God is saying to you. Jesus made it really easy. This is what I really appreciate about Jesus. He didn't complicate things a whole lot. He told some stories that had to be figured out, but then he explained them, so it was all good. But simple things like, love those who hate you. Wow. What does he mean by that? Pray for those who persecute you or those who spitefully use you. I wonder what he was meaning. This is a great place to start. This is just a great place to start, is just what Jesus said. And then going into the New Testament. Old Testament is more confusing because a lot of it is symbology. And a lot of it is actually you need to take it in a bigger concept, and you need to interpret it through the lens of Jesus, and it gets more complicated. It's not that it can't be understood, it's just that it is more complicated. It's kind of like using a PC versus a Mac. So they both work, but one's more complicated. There's times, though, that God, when he speaks to you, you'll go through seasons where what he's saying is scary. You'll go through the seasons where the personal trainer is talking, and he starts doing things in your life that are for your strength and for your development and for your long term, the long term. And the Bible's literally filled with stories and stories and stories of individuals where God showed up and gave instructions that were just downright scary. They were just downright, sometimes terrifying. And so I want to start with one as a tribute to mothers. Maybe one of the most famous mothers who's ever lived is the story of Mary. And where God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin whose name was Mary. And the angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you." And Mary was greatly troubled at his words, wondering what kind of greeting this might be. Then the angel said to her, "Don't be afraid, Mary, for you've found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you'll call him Jesus, and he'll be great, and the Lord will give him the throne with his father David. He'll reign over his descendants forever, and his kingdom will never end." And Mary is like, "Well, how is this going to happen since I'm a virgin?" I love this here, that every question that she asks actually leads to more problems. Every answer that Gabriel says, well, the Holy Spirit's going to come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. And it's like, well, in my world, when a teenage virgin has a baby out of wedlock, most people don't call that baby the Son of God. They get a different name that the pastor won't say from the platform. Sorry, honey. There's times in your walk with God that every question you're answering, every question you're answering, every question you're asking seems to get answered with another problem. And it's like you almost get to the point, I don't want to ask any more questions, because this is just getting harder as I keep going. Greetings. Mary, you have found favor with God. Well, if I'm so highly favored, why are you wrecking my life? This is like Jewish traditional culture. An unwed teenage mother, she's going to be ostracized for the rest of her life. The law of Israel actually called for them to execute her for becoming pregnant out of wedlock. And even if they didn't execute her, this would be a stigma that she would carry the rest of her life. She would forever be known as the lady who had the child out of wedlock. Forever. If I'm so highly favored, why are you doing this to me? And don't tell me you haven't asked God that question. Don't tell me that you haven't in your own mind thought, if God loves me so much, why is he allowing this to happen? Why is this taking place like this? I went into this with the best of intentions. I went into this with the purest of ambition. I would do anything I could for this to go away. God, whatever you want from me. And the problems don't always go away. Sometimes there's only one response in situations, And it's the same response that Mary had. She said, I'm the Lord's servant. May your word be fulfilled. May your word to me be fulfilled. You know, sometimes your only response, translated, that means I don't get it, but I'll trust you. I don't understand what's going on, but I'll trust you. And, you know, sometimes that's the only response you can have, because getting answers to questions almost makes things worse. The second situation we're going to look at today, one called pick up your mat. Pick up your mat. Jesus went to Jerusalem, and he went near the sheep. There was a pool near the sheep gate where a number of disabled people used to lie. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed. What would happen is this pool would stir, and the first person in the pool, it said that when they would go in, they would be healed. And so there's all these invalids that would just wait for this pool for the waters to stir. And there was one there who had been an invalid for 38 years. 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he'd been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? That's a stupid question, Jesus. Like, really? I think it would be quite evident that he wants to get well. But think about it for a moment. This 38 years of being at this pool, 38 years of people feeding him because he couldn't feed himself. 38 years of this condition actually being his provision. That's a scary thing to walk away from. Do you want to be whole? Do you want to have to feed yourself? Do you want to have to work for yourself? Or is it easier to stay a victim and have people take care of you? Is it easier to be the one who's hurt so that the strong will take responsibility for you? Do you want to be whole? Do you want to be the one to become strong so that you can take care of others? Some good questions, isn't it? See, if he's whole, there's no more disability payments. There's no more free lunches. If he's whole, he has to, he basically, if he picks up his mat and he walks, he's walking away from that which is provided for him for the last 38 years. And the moment he stood to his feet, the free food train stops. The comfort of having others take care of you stops the moment you pick up your mat and you walk. The moment he picks it up, he's no longer a victim, but now he has to take the responsibility for others, to be strong for others. See, it's a scary question when Jesus says, pick up your mat and walk. Or it's a scary statement when he says, pick up your mat and walk, because it means you're walking away from that which has provided for you. It says he picked up his mat. At once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and he walked. And then this last example of where God's voice just gets a little bit scary. And this is a man, I love this man. His name is Peter. And I love Peter. Peter was always doing things without thinking about the consequences. Like, he just talked. He's one of those guys, we all know someone like this in our world. It's like, they make statements and you're just like, God, would you just think about what you're going to say, like, for half a second before you say it? Peter was that guy. Peter's just like, a thought hits his head. It's like there's no space between head and mouth. Brain and mouth are just boom. As soon as it's in the brain, it's out the mouth. And just no thought for consequences. No, it's like, oh, this is a good idea. Let's do it. Some of us have been like that at various times in our lives. I've been like that. When I was a kid, I was a lot like that. Let's jump this bike over this chasm. Yeah. Like, it's one time, this is the story JD was referring to. One time I just got it in my head that I wanted a hockey rink in our garage. And it's a good idea. I mean, I was 12, I liked hockey. what else do we need? And so, like any rash, unthinking young teenager, I think it was probably like 12 or 13, I just go grab the garden hose from the side of the house, and I break a window, and I pop it through the window. And I pop it through the garage window, and I'm just standing there. Hose is running, I'm just holding the hose in the window, just standing there. It's November, it's great, it's frozen, this is gonna work. And my dad comes out of the back door of the house, and he looks at me, and he stares at me for a moment as I'm standing there with the hose in the window. You know, water's starting to come out the front of the garage. He looks at me, what are you doing? I just look at him, flooding the garage. Like, no, like nothing had registered that this might not be a good idea. Peter was this kind of guy. Peter was this kind of guy. It's like he thought about it, he did it. And we find the disciples in a boat. And this story's come up a lot lately. It's one of my favorites. It's, you know, the disciples were sent ahead on the lake. They're in a storm. They're fearing for their lives. These are seasoned fishermen, so you know this storm is serious. If they're fearing for their lives, this is a serious storm. And so they're fearing for their lives. Jesus comes walking across the lake to them, and they see, it says, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Who responds this way? Like, who does this? Yeah, it's a ghost. No, it says it's Jesus and he wants me to come. Have you not read any fantasy novels in your life, Peter? Like, the deceiving ghost lures you to your death every time. That's how this works. Come, Jesus said. And Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But then he saw the wind, and he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? You know, a lot of times people focus on this part where he began to sink, but I just can't help but focus on the fact that Peter was willing to just step over the side of a boat and walk. It's like, we don't even know who else was in the boat with him. Their names aren't mentioned, and they certainly weren't volunteering to go with him. These times, you know, Peter, he got himself in scary situations through his own initiative, but God was with him. You know, you've heard the saying, we're going to make it or we're going to die trying. Well, there's times you could die trying. There's times or you could lose a lot in the effort. You know, there's times that steps of obedience or steps of following God are scary, and there's consequences. You know, when you're deciding, should I change careers? Should I go back and get a new education, or should I start this new venture, or should I, you know, there's consequences to failure at times. These are scary moments. And there's times where it's like, well, I would like to walk on the water, but I would like to hold on to the side of the boat. It's like, well, you don't get that option. You're either out of the boat or you're in the boat. But you don't get to hold on to the boat as you walk. It doesn't work that way. And these steps, you know, there's times that God, you feel his leading. It's like, this is significant, and this has a price tag. Sometimes it's an emotional price tag. Sometimes it's the uncertainty of the future. Sometimes it's an actual financial price tag. When you start feeling God's called you to start giving and start partnering with the church, there's consequences to that. But you never get to experience what happens next until you do what has to be done first. You never get to experience the benefit of the promise until you take the first steps of going into the promise. You don't get to experience the benefits of diet and exercise until you actually diet and exercise. It's true. We would love to make it so you couldn't. And there's lots of little products you can buy. You see the fat burner. It just makes the fat melt in the jar. It's great. I'm betting that's not true. Just call it a hunch, but I'm betting that it actually doesn't, you can't physically watch it disappear. But there's ways. It's work. You have to do. You never get to experience the benefit until you take the first steps. So let me give you some things about when God speaks. When God speaks, he speaks to your potential. He speaks to your potential. He doesn't speak to your failure. He doesn't speak to your weakness because he doesn't see your failure. He doesn't speak to your sin. Monica talked about this last week. You know, it's the accuser that speaks to your sin. He speaks to your potential because when he looks at you, he doesn't see your sin. He sees the price he paid to forgive you of your sin. He sees redeemed. He doesn't see, when he looks at you, he doesn't look at someone who's defeated. He sees somebody who's victorious. Ecclesiastes 3:11, it says, God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He's planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. You know, we don't see what God is doing in us at the end, but he starts speaking to what he's doing at the very end. God will speak to the person you're meant to be, not the person that you believe that you are. And what's interesting is all through the Bible we find God renaming people. Simon, you're not going to be Simon anymore. From now on, you'll be called Peter. Abram to Abraham. Jacob to Israel. All through the Bible, he renamed people because there was something greater that he was going to do. And the common trait that you find is that when people got new names was they were in a season of struggle in their lives. It was a season of struggle. Jacob, literally, it was after he wrestled with God that God touched his hip and said, from now on, you'll be known as Israel because you wrestled with God and you prevailed. Second thing is following will take faith. Following will take faith. Following God takes faith. Now, I'm a planned and structured person. And you can just ask my wife how I respond when she tells me that we have an event that's not on the calendar. And she can probably use some very descriptive terms to describe me. And this serves me very well in parts of my life. This serves me very well. The only problem is God doesn't seem to understand this. He doesn't seem to work with me on this. You know, if we have all our questions answered at the front, faith plays no role in the journey. If we have everything lined out and charted and graphed, where's faith in that? And let me say this last one here. This is so important. Just because you go through a season of failure and struggle, it doesn't always mean that you didn't hear God. Sometimes failure and struggle is actually a part of the process of you growing. And you know, I love the story of how when a mother eagle wants to teach the little eaglets how to fly, the first thing she does is start pulling the soft down padding out of the nest. And what happens is the little eaglet, as she pulls out this padding, it has to get closer and closer to the edge of the nest because it's uncomfortable to be in the nest anymore. And it starts going closer and closer. And as it gets to the edge of the nest, you know what the mother eagle does? This is true. It just happens to be a great illustration. And do you know how many little eaglets fly for the first time they're kicked out of the nest, that they're thrown over the edge? None of them. Exactly. None of them. And you know what that mother does? She swoops down, catches it on its back, takes it up, and drops it again. And this just goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on, until a few days later, that little baby eaglet, through that struggling on the way down, the muscles grew. And then one day, the little eaglet just takes the corner and goes up on its own. And God's doing that to you. There's times He'll just drop you and let you struggle, and you'll feel like, I'm such a failure. Well, don't worry about it. Your wings haven't grown in yet, but they're coming. Let's stand up. The question we have to ask at the beginning is, who do we want to be at the end? Do we want to be the people that got massaged, that got comforted, and then just stayed there? Or do we want to become the people that became strong, that learned how to fly on their own? The people that overcame, didn't have their problems removed, but actually overcame the problems. You know, this is the one thing that I want to just encourage you with when it comes to hearing and kind of knowing what is God saying. What God is saying to you isn't so much about what you're doing. It's not about, should I be a carpenter or should I be a plumber? God doesn't care. It doesn't matter. Would you rather be a plumber or would you rather be a carpenter? Well, I'd rather be an arborist. Be an arborist. That's not what God is. What He's asking us is, who are you becoming? It's what kind of carpenter will you be? What kind of plumber will you be? What will the character of the arborist be? Because that's what He's leading us into. It's not into what we're doing. It's into who we're becoming. And that is so much of the voice of God is about leading us into who He wants us to become. And I want to say, let's just close our eyes and just put our hand on our hearts and just say, Jesus, I'm open to your leading me. Would you speak to me and help me to respond? Help me to respond in faith and not live by fear or be controlled by fear. And I pray that I wouldn't get stuck just wanting comfort, but that I'd get your strength as well to overcome the challenges and to become strong, become more than a conqueror. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
We hope today's message encouraged you. If you want to take your next step in saying yes to Jesus, you can always contact us at cty.lc or fill out the next step section on the City Life app. It's an honor as a church to play just a small part in what God is doing in your life, and we look forward to seeing you soon here at City Life.